Okay, so you guys came up with definitions for chromosome. Pretty much all of you said that they're DNA. A lot of you mentioned that there are proteins, that they're stored in the nucleus. And we're going to talk a lot about chromosomes, but I want to first clarify something that I feel like was never made clear to me, and I was confused because of it. Usually, there are no chromosomes in your cells. What? Chromosomes are those DNA strands wrapped around proteins, but they're only called chromosomes when they're folded neatly. Usually they're a little bit messier. They're in a longer form called chromatin. And if you've got a couch full of blankets, you've been having a movie marathon on a Sunday afternoon with your siblings or whoever, and you've got, 46 blankets all piled up on the couch, that's fine as long as you're not leaving the couch. But if you need to take those 46 blankets downstairs, you're probably going to want to fold them up before you try to make the trip. So the chromosome structure is the neater, easier to transport, easier to move form that only occurs when cells are dividing. But they're easier to visualize, so that's what we're going to talk about. So the chromatin, whoops, I wanted to pick a new color, is these long thread-like structures. It is still DNA and protein. It's not, the stuff has not changed. DNA wrapped around protein. But it's long, it's awkward, it's sort of ungainly. The chromosome, in order for the cell to reproduce, this actually gets copied. So we get 2 copies of it. And then those 2 copies connect and thicken up and fold up, and you get a structure that looks kind of like this. So, still DNA and proteins. It's a double copy. It's a double-stranded DNA. But more compact, easier to transport, less likely to get broken, snagged, torn, dropped on the stairs. That's a metaphor. There are no stairs. Okay. Is there anything else we know about chromosomes? A few people said they exist in almost every cell in the body. Do you think that all living things have chromosomes? How many of you would say yes? Okay. All living things do have DNA. They do have chromosomes, but it doesn't all look like this. So everything that reproduces sexually ends up at some point in the process with a chromosome that looks something like that. And we're going to look at actual pictures of chromosomes. They're a little different. Bacterial chromosomes are different because, remember, they're just a bracelet of DNA. It's a single loop of DNA wrapped around protein. So bacterial chromosomes are a little bit different. So nobody came up with numbers, but then when prompted, a few people did. Let's look at an actual picture of chromosomes. This is a karyotype. It is a literal picture of chromosomes. This is some humans' chromosomes. And you'll notice that they're arranged in pairs. So this is pair 1, pair 2, pair 3, pair 4. They are numbered in descending order of size. So the longest chromosomes are pair 1, and the shortest little chromosomes are pair 22. And as you might expect, there is actually less DNA on chromosome 22, on the 22nd chromosomes, than there is on the first chromosome. There are more genes on chromosome 1, both copies, than there are on chromosome 22. There's less DNA. Less stuff is controlled on that 22nd chromosome because it's short. It's like picking up a notebook. Well, you pick up a big, giant, fat 5-subject notebook, you can fit more information in it. You pick up a little tiny, skinny, tiny little pad, you can't put a whole lot of information on it. Same with the chromosomes. So, you might also notice that they're all in pairs, and we show one picture of each one of the first 22 pairs. Okay? So pairs 1 through 22. Okay, so pairs 1 through 22 have a name. Pairs 1 through 22 are called autosomes. And we could just as well call them body chromosomes. Okay. We could just as well call them body chromosomes. You should be writing this down. You can take a screenshot picture of the karyotype if you want. And there are genes on these body chromosomes, these autosomes, for all sorts of things. Hair color, eye color, leg length, a number of conditions. There's a gene, I forget which chromosome it's on, that controls a process by which your body makes mucus. And if you get a defect in that chromosome, you end up with thicker mucus than average. And that's a disease called cystic fibrosis, which we'll talk about a little later. There are genes for all kinds of things on this. All kinds of genes that control things about you. Now, we get to the last set of chromosomes, and note that there are two pairs here. This is pair 23, and these are the sex chromosomes. And on those sex chromosomes, we'll put pair 23. There are also genes for how to make the cells inside your eye, how to make cells on the scalp that produce hair follicles. There are some genes on those sex chromosomes, that tell your body how to make muscle tissue and how to process some of the chemical reactions that have to happen in muscle tissue. All kinds of genes. There are also genes on that 23rd pair that control primary and secondary sexual characteristics. So let's talk about what those are. Now, obviously, these are only an issue in species that reproduce sexually. Species that only reproduce asexually do not have sexes. There is no concept of biological sex. If everybody is the same, there's no sex chromosome. So yeast, for instance, there are no male and female yeast. They're all just yeast. They reproduce asexually. They split off a little chunk of themselves and there's a new yeast. Hello! So primary sexual characteristics are those things, they're genitals, internal and external genitalia. So that is testicles, penises, vaginas, uteruses, ovaries. It's the actual plumbing. So it's down to what kind of gametes you produce. Do you produce eggs or sperm? That's your primary sexual characteristic. Now, what's interesting is linked to that, traveling on the same chromosome, are secondary sexual characteristics. These are the things, so humans and a lot of other animals exhibit what is called sexual dimorphism. Di means how many? 2. Morph refers to what? Shape. Not changing! Shape! I'm going to come over there and step on your toes. Refers to shape. Sexual dimorphism means 2 shapes based on sex. So, in bird species, in cardinals, there is sexual dimorphism. How can we tell a male cardinal from a female cardinal?
The males are usually brighter.
Yeah, the males are red, the females are brown. That's sexual dimorphism. They're 2 different appearances based on their sex. In humans, on average, males are slightly larger. On average, males tend to have different shoulder-to-waist ratios. On average, males grow facial hair and more body hair than females. Those are secondary sexual characteristics. Just because you have wider shoulders doesn't mean that you produce sperm, not eggs. I have really wide shoulders. I got farm girl shoulders, and as a teenage girl, I was always embarrassed because I felt like if I was standing next to a boy and my shoulders were wider than him, there was clearly something desperately wrong with me. There wasn't. It's fine. All teenagers feel insecure about something. That was my thing. Oh, along with a whole list. But, whatever. That's being an adolescent. So, that's a secondary sexual characteristic. There's a usual pattern that goes with sex, but it's not hard and fast. Facial hair. I had a friend who, in college, her mother had the same condition. There was a 50-50 shot that either of her daughters would inherit it. She had 2 daughters. My friend Amy had to shave her face every day from the time she was about 14. Or she would have a beard. Her mother had the same condition. It's a single gene mutation. She admitted to all of us one night, I also get a little bit of hair on my chest. Oh. I mean, you want to talk about like all of the normal insecurities that any teenager has. Try being a 14-year-old girl who has to shave every morning. How much fun is adolescence for you? Her sister didn't get the gene. Her sister didn't grow a beard. I'm sure she wanted to kick her sister in the shins on a daily basis because she had to deal with something her little sister didn't. But again, that's a secondary sexual characteristic. Amy has gone on to have, I think, 3 children, produce three children in her very own uterus, you know. So her primary sexual characteristics are all female. However, she happens to have one secondary sexual characteristic that is normally associated with males. It happens. So, on these sex chromosomes, the usual configuration is XX, female, oops, I don't have room, I'll just write it, biologically female, XY, biologically male. Now, that is biological sex, okay? So that is primary sexual characteristic. That is which gamete you produce. In general, XX produces eggs. In general, XY produces sperm. In general, XX are slightly smaller, have slightly lower muscular density, have a slightly different shoulder to hip to waist ratio, tend to not have as much body hair, all that. In general, males tend to, you get the picture. This is where we're going to talk about trisomy. How many does tri refer to? 3. So let's note that there are two chromosomes in each pair. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You get the picture. You got one from Yo Mama. I have fun with this. You got one from Yo Papa. Period. That's where they came from. Every now and then something goes wrong with the process of making an egg or a sperm, and it ends up with either no chromosome in a particular location, or it ends up with 2 copies. When that happens, we have what's called we can have either a null error, or we can have a trisomy error. So we'll talk about this on the sex chromosomes first. Like I said, the most common arrangement, the arrangement that's the easiest to deal with, is you get 1 copy of each, and XX, you're biologically female, you're producing eggs, XY, you're biologically male, you're producing sperm. It can happen that you get either an egg or a sperm that has 2 X's, and you get this. Triple X. You can have a triple X chromosomal arrangement. That I always screw these up. That's Turner syndrome. And I might have to rescind this if I look it up. But you can end up as a female with 3 X chromosomes. I reserve the right to look it up and correct myself later. And you present as biologically female. At birth, there is nothing that says not a female. External genitalia look female. Internal genitalia are female. I think Turner syndrome individuals are typically infertile, as I recall. There are also some there are distinct physical characteristics that go along with this particular trisomy. So having 3 copies of any chromosome is a trisomy. I'm going to write that down. Okay, so you can have a trisomy on the sex chromosomes. You can have XXX. You can also have XXY, and I think that's Klinefelter's. So individuals, and again, you end up with an egg or a sperm that has an extra chromosome. And Klinefelter's males present as biologically normal males at birth. They have a penis, they have testicles. The doctor looks and says, "It's a boy!" And they are fairly on track with their peers up through adolescence. At adolescence, however, when everybody else is getting chest hair and everybody else's voice is dropping and everybody else is getting hair other places, Klinefelter's boys lag. So at 17 or 18 or 19, they still look kind of like a 12-year-old boy, which, again, imagine all the insecurities that you would have in adolescence. You know, all the normal insecurities that everybody has in adolescence, and then let's add to the mix, yeah, everybody else's voice changed, and everybody else has hair on their chest, and everybody else has a beard, and everybody else has hair other places, and I see it in the locker room and not me. Great, life is fun. So Klinefelter, I'm not sure, I think Klinefelter's males are often infertile, but I don't think that's hard and fast. These are both trisomy situations. You can also have other situations where things are not as they appear. So there is something called an XY androgen insensitive, you ready? Female. You can have an X and a Y chromosome and present as female because there is a genetic mutation elsewhere in your DNA that makes your body immune to the effects of androgen. Androgen, I keep knocking these darn things over. Androgen is one of the chemicals that when a fetus gets androgen during gestation, androgen forces those primary and secondary sexual characteristics to appear. So that's, you know, you take a fetus, you apply androgen and testosterone, and they grow a penis, and they grow testicles, and they grow all the other, you know, genetic markers that are going to lead to primary and secondary sexual characteristics of a male. XY androgen insensitive males have an XY chromosome, but elsewhere there's a switch that is not turned on. So you can flood that tiny little fetus with androgen, and it doesn't have any effect. So, every time, very often XY androgen insensitive individuals are referred to as Amazon superwomen because these women tend to be tall, broad-shouldered, very athletic. In the days before genetic testing was a standard component of like athletic screenings, there's a fair chance that a lot of sort of super female athletes were XY androgen insensitive. Because if you did a genetic profile on them, you would say, hey, you're XY. You know, and I don't know how that's been settled by things like the Olympics or anybody else if XY androgen insensitive females are allowed to compete as women. You know, they present as women, they have normal external genitalia. Now, I happen to also know a woman who is XY androgen insensitive. She is not as tall as the stereotype. Sitting around one evening in college with a bunch of women drinking coffee at a table, having the kind of conversations that a bunch of young women will have, there was a conversation about menstruation, okay? To which she said, I wouldn't know. Never had one, never will. Really? I mean, we're in our early 20s. I didn't know her that well. It might have been a little bit of an overshare. We all kind of looked at her. Really? Nope, don't have a uterus. Oh. Well, since you've shared this much, would you care to share any more? She was very comfortable with herself and her condition, which she had known about since she was 15 or 16. So for individuals who are XY androgen insensitive, and especially if you've got sisters or you know, a mom who knows that she got her first period, that's called menarche, at 13. And your sister did it at 13. And you're 15 and nothing's happened yet. You're really starting to wonder what the heck's going on here. That typically leads to a trip to the doctor to find out what the heck's going on. At which point, for women who are XY androgen insensitive, they realize that they are so imagine, again, like if we want to think about the list of adolescent insecurities that you could be dealing with, because you've all got your own list. My nose is funny. My eyebrows are crooked. My feet are not the same size. My ears, this ear hangs lower. I know everybody stares at my ear. I know it. No, they don't. They don't care about your ear. But whatever, the whole list of things that most adolescents, I think, have in their head that, is the list of things that everybody's clearly staring at. I have funny lines right here. Oh my God, I have a freckle right here. Ah! Imagine being a 15-year-old girl who is told, you actually have an XY chromosome. What does that mean for me? I mean, for one thing, she knew from the age of 15 she would never have a biological child. She has no uterus. She has no ovaries. She is not producing eggs. She has no place to gestate a fetus. Oh. You know, I think it's one thing, and I've known people who, by their early 20s, knew they did not want to have children ever. I have a friend who, as she said, had that little problem fixed at 24. She knew she said, I would not be a good mother. I'm not going to do it. Okay. That's different than being told at 15, it's not an option for you. Oh. Oh. It's a lot to digest. Now, here's what I want to talk about. And the segue to this is how comfortable Elizabeth was with the facts of her own biology. Let's talk about the words normal and ordinary, shall we? Because guess what? Normal is whatever's normal for you. So for my friend Amy, though she didn't like it, grabbing a razor every morning from the age of 14 on and shaving her face so she didn't have a beard when she went to school. Can you imagine the kind of merciless ridicule that middle schoolers could dish out on that? Oh, I hate middle schoolers. Honestly, they're cruel. They're much crueler than high schoolers. Most people outgrow it. Most people outgrow it. That's the goal. That was normal for her, having to shave every morning. Now, is that usual? No. It's not usual, it's not typical, it's pretty out of the ordinary, but it's normal for her. For somebody who has a triple X, and Turner syndrome women tend to have somewhat lowered mental capacity, so somewhat lowered IQ than you would otherwise expect, lowered hairline, and I think Turner's is the one where, I forget the name for it, but the neck almost looks webbed. There's this very distinctive pattern to the neck. If you're born with a triple X, that's your normal. That's normal for you. That's what you got. And here's the thing. Who here chose their own genome? Who here chose all their own chromosomes at conception? I didn't. You don't get to choose your chromosomes. I'm quite sure that Amy would have chosen to not have to shave every morning before high school. Pretty darn sure. I don't know if my friend Elizabeth ever wanted to have kids or not. She did not end up adopting children. She did not end up becoming a mother. She's an awesome aunt. She's got a host of nieces and nephews who she loves dearly. She could have pursued having children through adoption. There would have been routes for her. She didn't. But I'm sure that given the choice to choose her own chromosomes, she might have chosen to have options that she didn't have, whether she wanted to execute those options or not. You don't get to choose this stuff. Having no uterus is normal for her. Is it usual? No. Most people who appear biologically female come with a uterus. What's normal and what's usual are two different things. So, with that, I'm going to pause. Okay, now here's the thing. Has anybody tried to cook a recipe? From a recipe, following directions. Oh boy, okay. So I have my very favorite scone recipe. I baked scones over the weekend. And I have an awesome scone recipe. I know the recipe pretty much by heart. Good. It's out of one of my favorite cookbooks. I have another cookbook that has a scone recipe, and I have another cookbook that have 3 different scone recipes. The one that I use the most often is my favorite. If I tried to follow all 3 sets of directions at once, what do you think would happen? Oh, it'd be a mess. Yeah, it would be a disaster. If I actually made scones, they would be inedible. I would be terribly confused. Everything would just be wrecked. And then I burn 2 of the cookbooks and just keep the one I like. Well, so with chromosomes, or pieces of chromatin with sections of DNA, you need 2 sets of directions at each position. What happens if there's a 3rd chromosome in any one of those positions? That is called a trisomy error. So here's the thing. Most trisomies are fatal. Fatal means deadly. Incompatible with life is the term that's often used. So, do you all know that most pregnancies end before a woman even knows she's pregnant? many, 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 many eggs are fertilized and never implant, or the body does all kinds of error scanning. The body kind of goes, yeah, will this work? Will this work? Oh, this will not work. It's called a spontaneous abortion or a miscarriage. And the body says, this will not work. And if you have a trisomy error on most chromosomes, the body will say, yeah, this doesn't work. It's gone. The pregnancy ends. There's a real critical period between 6 to 7 weeks and then again at 10 weeks, which is why when a woman becomes pregnant and she calls her doctor and says, I'm pregnant, can I come in and see you? They say 8 weeks. Because a lot of pregnancies end at 6 or 7. And they want to get you past that point before they'll actually start testing and doing all the stuff they do. So, a trisomy error at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, blah, blah, blah. Those are all fatal. You get 3 copies of any of those chromosomes, and there is a miscarriage, period. It is a defect incompatible with life. It can happen because you had an egg with an extra copy. It can happen because you had a sperm with an extra copy. Doesn't matter where it came from. 3 copies of any of those chromosomes, incompatible with life, miscarriage, gone. That's not a viable human. There are too many sets of directions to follow. So, there are 2 exceptions to that. Let me see if I can get rid of some of my marks here. 18 and 21. And let me get rid of all my sex chromosome stuff down here. 18 and 21. You can have a trisomy on either of those and survive it. And be born and be a functioning human. Does anybody know what either of those is called right off the top of their head? Anybody have a guess? Talk at your tables. Do you think you know? Trisomy 21 is also known as Down syndrome. Now, there are very unique, distinctive facial features associated with trisomy 21. And it used, God, the terminology we used to use was just not even marginally offensive. It was just offensive. But the epicanthic fold, the fold over your eyes that people whose ancestors are primarily from Africa, Europe, and Australia have, but people whose ancestors are predominantly from Asia do not. That epicanthic fold is usually not present in individuals with Down syndrome. There are also some other facial features. There's a loss of muscle tone. There's a heart defect that most individuals with Down syndrome carry. And there's a lowered intellectual capacity. Most individuals with Down syndrome have anywhere from mild to moderate to severe retardation. Is it survivable? Yeah. People are born with Down syndrome every day. And it's quite survivable. Now, individuals with Down syndrome typically do not have as long a lifespan because of the heart defect that's associated with that particular genetic makeup. So, and I think it's gotten better. It used to be that people with Downs usually didn't live past their 40s. I think now they live into their 50s pretty regularly. But it's a challenge. Now here's the interesting part, and the other one is 18, which somebody looked up for me in the other class. It's Edwards syndrome. Also comes with a set of sort of markers where someone who's a knowledgeable medical professional could say, oh, I bet that individual has Edwards. So, okay. You can look at somebody coming down the street. Let's talk a little bit about nature-nurture. Do you know what that means? Interesting. What do you think? Fights about it? Is it nature or is it nurture? Whether it is your intellectual ability, your athletic ability, your sense of humor, is it nature or is it nurture? Well, okay, tomorrow we'll have Play-Doh chromosomes. Have a good day.